All right, it is recording. Welcome to Let's Talk About It Tuesday. I'm Georgette. I'm the mom.
And I'm TJ. I'm the son.
And we both live and work and breathe and everything psychology. And we
Facts.
want to share what we know with you so that you can live your best life.
More facts.
So today we're going to talk about fear.
Mm-hmm.
Fear is an emotion. It's one of the primary emotions that we have. Emotions are basically responses to events or thoughts, but fear is complex. On the one hand, it's appropriate, protecting us from danger. On the other hand, it's inappropriate. Think about phobias that we have.
For the most part, it is irrational, more likely to be a little bit more irrational and be played up in our own heads as opposed to actually existing out there in the world for the most part.
Right.
Yeah?
The other interesting thing about fear is that we try to avoid it, think about things like public speaking, but we also seek it out,
Our subconscious brain wants us to stay away from it as much as possible because of the danger, the unknown, the anxiety. But there's a huge amount of a self-actualization that knows that if we accomplish it, it is something that will go so much beyond just, the fear, and it will be something that absolutely influences our life. It's just hard.
Yeah, the other really interesting thing I think about fear is that it's universal. You can go to any country, not speak their language, and be able to recognize fear on someone's face.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and fear, the actual facial expression that we see when we recognize that is very similar to surprise. If you think about what we look like, what our face does when we're surprised versus, when we're scared, they're very, very similar. There's subtle changes in eyebrows and lip tensing. More whites of your eyes are exposed when you're afraid. So it's really kind of interesting that we can recognize that in other people.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you can see it oozing out of them.
Mm-hmm. So we have a physiological response to fear. When we receive that sensory information, it goes to our thalamus, which then gets directed to our amygdala. Amygdala is that emotional center that we have.
That remembers every single baselines that we can't possibly remember because there's just so much to deal with. So yeah, it kind of is the thing that helps you remember more so the danger as opposed to the safety towards a lot of these things. And yeah, it gets kind of lit up.
Yeah. What happens then is that your endocrine system, which releases all these stress hormones, and also your nervous system that is responsible for your fight or flight reaction, are activated.
Yes. Fight, flight response. As soon as you get that stressor, that stimuli, your heart rate starts beating faster and then also kind of rapidly and not necessarily controlled. Then all the blood vessels going throughout the entirety of your body because your heart's in that state of panic starts to kind of tighten up, start pushing the blood up more towards the heart, more towards the brain because it wants to protect the two powerhouses of the body. As that happens, your body's more susceptible to physical pain and also just kind of physical discomfort, right? Oftentimes when we feel the fear, our digestive system starts to deplete blood from that area to help once again with the heart and with the blood. So your digestive system, which actually produces a lot of serotonin and dopamine, starts to get decreased quite a bit. And all of the deep vital organs, even the nerves around there, start to change. For your liver, for example, that's in charge of your energy levels. Obviously, if I'm just sitting here, but I'm feeling a lot of fear, it's going to give me a lot of energy. It's going to utilize a lot of glucose because it thinks I need all this energy, even though I'm just staying put, right? So once again, kind of the secretion of hormones gets all out of whack. So the interesting thing is fear, anxiety, a lot of those things like that, we feel in the body as well as in the mind. So we have to learn to calm down the body because oftentimes, like always, we suffer more in that imagination stage than we do in the reality of the situation.
Yes.
Boom.
I was actually kind of looking at my checklist as he was speaking.
And I didn't even look at the checklist. I promise you, but Mom, let's have the checklist now.
He pretty much addressed everything. I'm just going to reinforce some of the things he said. So he mentioned that the blood flows to our larger muscles, preparing them to fight. That's why your hands start sweating. Right? You ever think about your hands sweating when you're nervous? He mentioned blood sugar increases. That is to give you energy to react. It's fascinating what our body does to protect us, our mind and our body. It's crazy when you think about it. He mentioned organs that are not vital to survival. They slow down. So if you've ever gotten those like butterfly feelings in your stomach, that's why.
Lack of blood flow.
Here's something interesting that's more animalistic, but it happens to us as well. We get goosebumps, right? Because of the muscles become tighter. But why we get goosebumps is for animals, it actually makes them, the hair stand on end and make them seem bigger and more formidable. Isn't that cool?
That's dope.
Yeah.
That is cool. That's a fun fact.
Brain becomes hyper alert, preparing us to be more efficient. I think you mentioned that too.
But that's the thing. It doesn't make us more efficient. It just makes us like move quicker. Right. But more often than not, for a lot of people that are suffering with fear, it's just quick thoughts that are not very helpful, right? So it prepares you for extremely quick, but we're the ones that consciously have to make it effective.
Right. Very good point. Thank you for clarifying that. Oxygen intake increases. I think you mentioned that. But when you get a lump in your throat, it's because what's happening is that airway is increasing, and when you swallow, it tries to decrease it, and so you feel that pressure, which feels like a lump in your throat. So fascinating what happens to your body. What TJ was talking about, though, is another thing that happens very, very quickly is that your hippocampus, which is responsible for your memories, and your prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for your executive functioning, are actually assessing that threat and determining whether it really is a threat or not.
But the prefrontal cortex, it dominates that, I guess, that pairing, so to speak, right? We normally jump right to the emotions, to the memories, to all the baselines that we have set because the brain pushes it in there so quickly outside of our awareness. And then from the frontal lobe aspect, which is more in charge of our rational thinking, executive, cognitive functions, the motor control, that tends to take kind of the back burner towards the situation because once again, that's why we're normally we act on emotions more than we do on the thoughts that we actually know that we should have, because this is just so much more powerful. But neurological plasticity, training the other side to let you know that these emotions that's being felt, this fear, is normally, and if you look at some of the quotes, unjustified, unreasoning for the most part.
Yeah.
Boom.
Now, we talked about fight or flight, but there's also a response that is more and more talked about, is the freeze response. And what I read about the freeze response is that it is thought to be a response from those who feel they are preyed upon. And the idea is that, think about a small animal who freezes. Like, if I freeze, they can't see me.
They can't see me.
So that's, I thought that was kind of interesting about the freeze response. So flight, fight, or freeze.
It's like we subconsciously freeze because if we freeze, maybe nobody will see us.
Yeah.
Deep.
We kind of talked about why we like to be scared already. It's that chemical rush, up and down.
Yeah.
That we really enjoy. Some people like scary movies, roller coasters, because that personal risk they put themselves in seemingly gets the stress hormones and all that nervous system response. Overcoming fear. So fear is very closely linked to anxiety. Anxiety is probably a form of fear, the more irrational part of fear that we see probably more often than actual, required fear, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things that the techniques or the principles that they use to overcome fear is something called habituation. So basically what happens is the more you're exposed to something, when we talk about exposure therapy, the more you're exposed to something, the more habitualized your nervous system is to it, and the less it responds. It kind of adapts to it.
Yeah, we have channels in all of our brains towards all the things we've ever been through throughout the entirety of our life, and just getting exposed to it under a controlled setting with controlled thoughts will just decrease your emotional response as you are training yourself to have different responses as opposed to that reaction that is just kind of coming out of you. Not necessarily because you consciously want to, because subconsciously it's kind of falling upon you so quickly. We talk a lot about fear setting. One of the most important aspects of fear is identifying what exactly you're afraid of. For example, I'm afraid of spiders. What exactly are you afraid of in terms of spiders? I'm afraid to be bitten and poisoned and to die. I'm afraid to be completely covered from head to toe in them because maybe the way that it makes me feel, right? Or taking one step further, why am I so afraid to take that next step as far as that job or applying to that schooling is concerned? I'm afraid that I'm going to be a failure. I'm afraid of this. I'm afraid of that, right? So once again, identifying that and identifying just what is in your control to prevent all those things, right? Once again, I don't want to go to school because what if they don't get it? What if I don't get accepted, right? Just making sure that your resume and your interviewing skills are as good as they possibly can be going into it, right? Because that's the only thing that you can control. Or maybe the later step, which is obviously another one that we also don't consider, is what will we do if it actually does happen? What if I don't? What if I do let my family down, right? Then I'm gonna have to quickly find something else to build upon so I don't let them down, right? So we're setting the fear. Another thing is kind of like on a lot of perspective. People is my fear. What are some things that I can do to kind of gradually build up, slowly be around people from an interpersonal standpoint so that I can kind of build on that exposure? Right. Because when it comes to fear, the thoughts and behaviors, what you choose to do and what you choose to think are going to be the best things that you can do as far as dimming down that emotional response, because exposure, and it's more so just us creating it more an imaginary standpoint.
Right. One of the problems with fear and anxiety is we tend to avoid those triggers. So we
Which
never,
makes them worse.
right. We never get habituated to
Which
them.
makes them worse.
Yeah.
Because you're sending such a strong danger signal, like, fuck, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Oh, sorry. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And it's, your brain's going to be like, all right, cool. So we're going to put more of a barrier. We're going to create more of an emotional response because you're continuing to do it. Our neurons, when they run, they get a lot better at running, right? We have to slow them down consciously. And the more that we can slow them down, the more that we're more open and receptive to alternative thought patterns that will dim down our fear response.
Right. We need to desensitize ourselves to those triggers so that they no longer activate that fight or flight response. And one of the ways I mentioned earlier, exposure therapy, TJ kind of described it, coming up with a hierarchy of that fear, and then gradually, including some kind of meditation along with it, so that as you progress up that hierarchy of things that scare you, you learn to relax and to control those fears. You become habituated.
Sound it out.
That's
sound it out.
Habituated to them, and then you can gradually accomplish your fears. So running away from your fears, avoiding them, worst thing you can do.
Yeah, fear setting, fear exposure, and then the last thing, just kind of to sum it all up, this is kind of where we have to unfortunately kind of pull up our big boy or big girl pants is, sometimes the fear won't go away, so you'll just have to do it afraid, right? I'm going to be afraid to apply for that job. I'm going to be afraid to have that conversation with that person. I'm going to be afraid of a lot of things in my life, but ask yourself in 6 months' time, how will I feel about the fear if I don't act on it now? Right? If I don't ask out that girl in 6 months, I'm going to still be lonely and probably be more upset with myself. If I don't apply for that job, guess what? I'm going to be in the same job that I continuously tell myself that I don't enjoy, right? So once again, looking at it and the whole thing, what exactly am I afraid of? How can I prevent it? What can I do if some of those things do come to fruition? Because a lot of them are not, right? And then how am I going to feel about this? What am I going to feel about this in 6 months' time, right? Because all of those things considered will allow you to kind of just constantly pull yourself out of the gutter and say, hey, you got to get through this. Because fear is not only a necessary part of life, it is the most important part, because chasing purpose and meaning is a lot more important than avoiding discomfort. And that fear is just another thing. It's just another way to say fear.
Yeah. Now think about when you are bored with things. What do? You seek out novel experiences. You do that because your nervous system isn't adapted to those new experiences. So we intentionally seek those out. So try to start becoming comfortable with challenging yourself, pushing yourself to that next level. Stop avoiding those things that scare you. Yes, it is uncomfortable, but try to appreciate that feeling of uncomfortableness. Try to let it energize you a little bit, because the discomfort you feel in the short term will have benefits if you continue to expose yourself to those fears.
Yes, indeed.
All right. Thank you for joining us today. We will talk to you next. Let's Talk About It Tuesday.
Gosh darn right we will.